Today's episode is brought to you by NordPass, an easy-to-use yet advanced password manager that makes online activities easier and safer. With NordPass, you won't find business account passwords in notebooks or shared files, and you won't need to find a physical company's credit card to share its details with your colleague. That's because NordPass allows all team members to store, manage, and share credentials and other sensitive data securely and conveniently. Beyond that, NordPass quickly identifies weak passwords, monitors data breaches, and gives you full control over who has access to company resources. And check this out. You can now get the NordPass Teams or Business Plan with 30% off. Just go to nordpass.com and use the code SWISSPRENEUR at checkout. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Again, that's nordpass.com, code SWISSPRENEUR.
We've been too conditioned at doing things that are easy. Doing hard things is absolutely essential, for the human spirit.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Sylvan.
Yves, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You are a venture designer, founder of the Fuse project, co-founder of Tilo, August, and Kinopi, and chief creative officer at Jawbone, August Home, and Tilo. That's quite a CV to start with.
Yeah, I'm a product of Switzerland and Europe, and in the last 25 plus years of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So starting new things and following through with them, building new things and executing on it is like an addiction. So
I love that.
I keep doing it.
You grew up near Lausanne in Switzerland, but you had a desire to escape Switzerland. Where did Switzerland fall short in terms of the life that you wanted to live?
Well, at the time, and we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, I was looking for a design school that would fit sort of the idea of working on a diversity of different creative projects. And I found ArtCenter, and ArtCenter was based in Switzerland at the time, but also in California. Mm-hmm. So I went to the California campus after a couple of years in Switzerland studying there. And it really became exciting to be, coming from a small town, in Switzerland and suddenly finding myself in a giant metropolis like Los Angeles.
And you studied then in Pasadena, and then you moved on to San Francisco to work. What was the culture shock like from moving from Switzerland to the big California in the United States?
But it was so different in many ways. At the same time, I felt fairly grounded. I mean, it was exciting to discover, a whole new world in my early 20s. And Los Angeles really was, full of diversity, when it came to so many different cultures where we're all around Los Angeles. So that became interesting, this discovering Japanese, Korean, Mexican, South American, and European cultures all in one place like Los Angeles.
But that also sounds pretty different to Switzerland. Was it easy for you to, accommodate and really get used to this new environment, new place, or was it also difficult at the beginning?
I think it's both. I mean, I think, discovering new things is easy. I would say understanding and fitting into a new culture, that's the hard part. Mm-hmm. But there is, when you're in your early 20s and you're surrounded by good friends at school and they're taking you to all the different places, to the beach, to surf, to downtown for, clubs and dance parties and and the mountains, for relaxation, it's quite wonderful to sort of discover this large new world. And of course, it's so different from Europe because you can drive for hours and hours and there is really nothing around. So discovering the large landscape, sometimes undisrupted, for hours of driving, was really fascinating to me.
That really helped to accommodate in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have, a culture shock, certainly there was, but I didn't have, I would say a prejudice or I was really into learning new things and discovering this new place.
And that was the right place to be for that, as it sounds.
Well, Los Angeles was fun, and exciting, and the school was great. But I very quickly realized that LA is really about entertainment. Okay. And there was a whole new world of developing new types of computers, new types of electronics, new types of services in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And they didn't have many designers then. I mean, they didn't really understand even the meaning of what design could do in this emerging industry. And so, I decided to move to San Francisco. It was where the jobs were, it's where I could make a living and survive. So that's where I went.
Exactly. I also want to go back in time a bit to your teenage years. Legend has it that you're part of the punk subculture back then, and you especially appreciated the DIY spirit. Isn't that also something that is very much related to an entrepreneur, something that allows you to fail and try again without being an expert, to find your own personal way?
Well, I think that's a great way to put it. You're answering the question by asking the question here. But yeah, being part of this permission to try things, to push at the boundaries and conventionalities of society during the 80s, during the punk era, was really interesting because obviously at that time, Switzerland was still quite conservative, was still quite homogeneous. And having that sort of free thinking and that bold, lack of fear in making things. I was inventing myself as a furniture maker. I was inventing myself as a fashion designer. My friends were playing music, and it didn't matter whether we were trained in those professions. We were 16, 17. We could just have fun at it and actually even sometimes get an audience, get appreciated for that. And that was quite liberating.
What of that spirit have you kept until today?
Well, I think the spirit of do it yourself, the spirit of, being unafraid of not knowing or not having the, all the experiences or sort of professional credentials is something that it still happens to me every single day. You will only learn, by doing. And I feel like if you expect learnings to come from people teaching you or from, knowledge being handed down to you, it will take a long time and you'll probably be very focused on one or two things. And if your mentality is to, kind of go at things and try them and fail and learn through this iterative process, it feels to me like I'm just learning. I continue to learn nonstop. And to me, that's the nectar of life, learning, growing through that, having daily discoveries is really a gift that my profession and my current situation allows me to do.
Fantastic. And then in 1999, you actually started fuseproject, a design studio which has since won numerous very high-profile awards. You also built an impressive client roster of Fortune 100 companies. How did fuseproject stand out from the crowd since day one back in 1999?
Well, I think in 1999, what I was I just had come out of 5-6 years of experiencing in consulting, working with Apple, working with Hewlett Packard. I was at Frog Design. And I really felt pretty strongly that the future was going to be integrated, meaning industrial design wasn't just making the object, but it was also going to be about creating brands, creating experiences, the digital experiences, the physical ones, working on a whole ecosystem, which I think design should be able to do. So I created fuseproject as a way to fuse different disciplines of design at the service of a big idea. And the big ideas kept coming, and clearly, being initially at least quite experimental, working with the MoMA, with SF MoMA, working on conceptual futuristic projects, that gave us visibility and a bit of reputation in terms of being able to combine new ideas, new lifestyle, new technologies into new companies.
Mm-hmm. So it really is your work, your designs that stand out here. And what would you say are the main guidelines or the main characteristics of great design?
To me, what stood out is the ability for design to make people understand these new technologies, to make them palatable, to make them digestible, to make them something that I can integrate into my life. Mm-hmm. So my definition of design became that design accelerates the adoption of new ideas. And there's plenty of new ideas out there that we really need in this 21st century in order to progress to a society that is more sustainable, that is more empathic, to technologies that are less distracting, and all the level of improvements and progress that we should be able to make can really be accelerated and facilitated by design.
And in that regard, I also wonder what inspires your designs. Like, where do you get your sources of inspiration to then come up with the designs, the work that you do?
For me, if I look at, how we live and our desires as human beings and the context of the world around us, to me, it's really about reconciling opposite ideas. For example, we want beauty and beautifully made things and objects around us at home and in the office. At the same time, we know that we have an environmental emergency on our hands. And so how do you reconcile, our natural need for, beauty and for practical things around us, and at the same time, this climate anxiety that we all have that consumes us in some ways. And I think, this is where design has a strong role to play in terms of supporting or pushing even the transformation of all industries towards more sustainable and even, possibly, carbon zero type of efforts. But if you don't do both, meaning if you don't satisfy the human needs and at the same time satisfy our needs for the planet, you won't succeed. If you only do one or the other, you're not likely able to make some progress. So reconciling ideas that are opposites, such as our desire for a beautiful home that is uncluttered by technology, and at the same time, we want control over the things around us. How do you make technology more discreet, more invisible? So this is, again, there these dichotomies, these opposites that design can bring together are so many these days.
That also sounds like a very, very difficult and tough job to do with some tough trade-offs along the way, because I imagine it's not always possible to combine the two extremes, right?
Well, I actually believe that it is possible, that you can achieve two things at the same time. And I think we've been too conditioned at doing things that are easy. Doing hard things is absolutely essential, for the human spirit. If everything around us is just comfortable and easy, and doesn't require, effort, there's no satisfaction, I really feel like we're in a place where everything is made so easy every day by our technologies. We have access to, so much entertainment and distraction, and it's easy to fall in that trap. But for me, what gives me satisfaction, and it's the same for my team, is actually hard problems, doing hard things, and coming out the other end, having suffered, but having learned, and having something that, can create meaningful change.
How do you continuously push yourself and also your team around you to go and tackle these hard problems? Because that also needs a certain push, I imagine, to keep going and not take the easy way that will be out there.
Well, I mean, certainly. So for me, suffering, through a problem is actually part of the creative process. It's part of how, whether I'm sleeping, whether I'm in the shower, whether I'm surfing, whether I'm with friends, you throw problems into your brain and your brain works on it over time. And you don't know whether it's 5 days or if it's 10 days or if it's 5 minutes. The idea will come if your brain works on it, if you put these challenges in your mind. And one of the expressions I use in the studio regularly is that pain is temporary, but suck is forever. Which means that, the pain you will go through to resolve a problem is worthwhile. Because if you don't, and if you come out with something average or mediocre, that will be there forever. And so I think that's an expression where I remind, everyone that suffering is not there for the goal of suffering, but for the goal of creating long-term progress.
I love that. That's a big inspiration. I also want to dive again a bit deeper into the design thinking and your design philosophy. In what other areas of your life do you apply similar thinking or similar reasoning to what you just described to us? How does that reflect in other areas of your life outside of your work or your designs?
Well, in some ways, people talk about work-life balance, and to me, the balance is between the extremes, which is moments of extreme intensity and fun, and moments of sort of calm and reflection. It's not about being somewhere in the middle all the time. That seems very, very boring, right? Yeah. And so balance is actually about, living in these extremes, being in the mountains or in the ocean and being surrounded by nature. And next thing, being in the middle of a city full of culture and entrepreneurial and business kind of, dynamism. And you can live those two things. And so for me, the risk taking that I enjoy at work, and the extremes of suffering and joy and celebration, those are similar things that I practice in my everyday life. It
sounds that the good old Swiss compromise would probably be a recipe for unhappiness for you.
Well, there's always compromise. There's even compromise at the extremes. Even when you are at your most radical, part of me and part of what design has to do is to bring it into reality without losing the initial big idea, or without losing the initial gesture and statements that you're trying to make. But to make things a reality, you need a good sense of that reality. You need a good sense of physics and what keeps these problems from, what allows these problems to be realized into something that works. So again, this is about two extremes, the extreme of the big idea and pushing for something iconic and different for new experiences. And at the same time, making sure that people will understand them and they'll be able to not feel intimidated by it. You want people to feel welcome by it. In fact, you want people to feel smarter by the things you bring into the world. And so many of the new products and new things that we see in our lives, they make us feel stupid. They make us feel like, I don't understand it. It's hard to use. That frustration is something that design can address and actually do the reverse. Give me a new experience that I can, as a user, as a consumer, that I can bring into my life in ways that makes me feel smart and adequate, rather than the other way around.
That would probably be an expression of a bad design if you have these feelings with a product.
So many companies, so many products make you feel stupid. They make you feel like you have to go through so many hoops, and the friction that is created by these, can be overwhelming and make us feel like we want to abandon. We're not smart enough for the product. So yes, I would call that bad design.
What role does simplicity play in that regard? Would that be an essential part of a good design?
Yes, absolutely. So, I often compare the role of the designer as well to one of being an editor. And in order to edit hours and hours of film or radio that's been recorded or sound to something concise and something that isn't too, that is easy to understand, that is a beautiful story, where the essence is well extracted out of all this material. That's what editing is, and that's what design is. And so often, we call that feature creep in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which is adding more and more features, more and more layers of complexity. We actually are, we help throw some of that over features. We help take that out. So what remains is actually essential and easy to digest.
And in the end, that is your job as a designer to define what should be in there and what shouldn't be in there. Again, there are sometimes tough trade-offs, and I just wanted to take one example. You also worked with Herman Miller with the chairs that probably all of the listeners know. There you probably also face these extremes, right? You want to have a beautiful chair, but you also want to have a comfortable chair. How do you balance the two in that very specific project?
Well, the office chair is actually one of the most complex projects that you can do as a designer. The ergonomic challenge is massive. It has to be comfortable for all kinds of height and shapes and weight. I would say that the physics of an office chair is quite complex because you need to be able to throw yourself in it and move. Right. And the sustainability part is quite hard as well because it's a hard product that's made of multiple materials. And, the regulatory environment is really complex. Every country has its own regulations for office chairs. Passing that and making something new and different within such a complex environment is pretty challenging. So I actually waited a long time to design an office chair. I felt right when I turned 40, I felt I was ready for it. But before that, it was a difficult problem to tackle that I felt intimidated about. So I made my first chair with Herman Miller when I was, I think, around 40. And now we're designing a couple more, which I'm excited about.
Wow. I'm excited to see them too. There's one quote that we took up when doing our research that also goes in that direction. And you said you're not interested in style. At the same time, you're a master of design. Can you explain these two extremes as well?
Well, style has been used as a signature by designers for a long time. And to me, I don't want to be a slave to a certain look or color. I really want design to answer the context in which it's being used. You know, we design for the aging, we design for young parents, we design for kids on the spectrum, we design for education, we design for pleasure and for the home. You know, we design for mental health. I mean, there's so many different areas of design that we're in. Why should it all look the same? Or why should it all have some kind of signature from fuseproject or Yves Béhar? You know, it doesn't really make sense to me. Yeah. And so, yes, a strong aesthetic is important because it communicates the idea as well. It also engages with the notion of aesthetics and beauty as well as functionality. But that can be diverse and different on projects rather than always the same.
Makes sense. In that regard, as your work as a designer, as a very talented and well-known designer, what is more important to you if you look back at your, career path? Talent versus skill. How did you balance these two?
Well, talent without hard work is wasted. And so, while I can recognize that, since I was a child, I was fascinated about building things and making things. If I hadn't worked 80 hours a week when I was in school at ArtCenter, I probably would not have come out the other side being a designer, that can make a difference. And so when you add talent plus hard work, a high level of skills, I think that's when you when your work can be quite potent. So, I think we should never forget that the two come hand in hand.
How do you actually discover that you had a strong talent in design and then also put in the work to develop the skills? Was that something that you just found out by natural curiosity, by trying things out, or how did you discover that?
For me, it was more an idea than a natural, ability. My friends in high school in Switzerland, they were so much better at drawing than I was. One of them became an artist, the other one became a fashion designer, and the other one became an architect. And I was, probably the least, good draftsman out of all three of them. That said, it was more an idea. I loved industrial design, and I realized at a young age, which is lucky for me, that at 16, that's what I wanted to pursue. And not being, sort of naturally a good draftsman in the beginning, and having at the same time that desire to be a designer, what it created is this urgency, this impossibility to go backwards. And so it became a matter of survival. There was nothing else I wanted to do, and there was nothing else I thought I could be good at. And so it was a thought, about being good at something, and then pursuing it relentlessly, that made me who I am, and that gave me this lifelong, love and pursuit.
Wow, that's also very inspiring to hear, because many people might not see that from the outside. They think, oh, you were always good at that, and then you put the hard work in to make it even better. But it was a bit different. That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I think it, especially for young people, it can be quite paralyzing to look at this talent you see online, and whether it's an amazing photographer or architect or designer, it can be quite intimidating. And when you're intimidated, it holds you back. You don't feel like you can be that good or participating. But for me, the most important part is to start a relationship, to start a passion, to start working on things. If you start, you will find out whether something will work or not. You will find out if you gather pleasure and love out of doing it. If you don't start and just stay intimidating and stay on the outskirts, you may have some regrets later in life. Yeah. So starting and trying and learning through that is really the only way that I see that that it worked for me, and the only way that I think it probably will work for others.
This episode was brought to you by Google Cloud, a partner that needs no introduction. What you might not have heard of, though, is that Google offers a Google for Startups cloud program where they give you access to startup experts, technical training, business support, and cover your Google Cloud costs up to $200,000 for 2 years, or even $350,000 if you're an AI startup. Scale your startup faster and smarter with Google Cloud. Head over to goo.gle/Swisspreneur. Were you ever at the point where you said, of course, it's not all rainbow and sunshine all the time, but were you ever at the point where you said, I think this is it. I stopped being a designer. I stopped my work.
Well, I think for a long time, I felt like if I didn't succeed in being a designer, I was going to end up being homeless or something. Mm-hmm. I know it really felt like I had no recourse. I really have, this immigrant mentality. And when you're an immigrant, whether it's in Switzerland or in France or in the US, there's no falling back. There's nowhere that you can go back to. And, there's no way that you can fail. You have to move forward and succeed. And I think that's why you see so many minorities and so many immigrants actually contributing such a large part of new companies, new businesses, and the economy in general. And I think that's one thing that we miss when we have discussions about immigration. We miss, that the immigrant mentality, which you don't have to be an immigrant to have, but you should have an immigrant mentality, no matter what your, geographical situation is, which is, look at things anew, feel challenged by them, and count on yourself and some close associates and friends, to make it happen. I wish that could be taught. Mm-hmm. The immigrant mentality. I think a lot of us, who are entrepreneurs, feel like that's a critical element of this type of work.
Yeah, it keeps you going and going. Failing is not an option.
Exactly.
You also shaped the term venture designer. So now I want to also look a bit behind the designs and see how you operate and how you work.
Sure.
What does that exactly mean, venture designer?
So venture design is something that I started in 2004 or 5. And it was really the realization for me that there were all these startups in the Bay Area, in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and all of them needed excellence, because without excellence, how do you compete with the big companies? But at the same time, they don't have that much money. And what I realized as well is that the best designs are done long term. When you work with someone for 6 months or a year, you get some results. But when you work with someone for like 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I'm lucky to say that there are people in my life that I have working relationships with for, a quarter of a century, for 25 years.
Wow.
And when you work with people long term, whether it's a business or a founder or CEO, the work gets better and better and better. And so the combination of these two things, how do I work, for long periods of time in order to have a better outcome with companies that don't have the money for that, meant that I needed to find a new business model, because typically design is consulting. It's how many hours you spend on something, and you're rewarded for your work hourly. But venture design is when you become a participant, when you become a member of the team with the same incentives and with the same potential rewards if the outcome is positive. And I think that's what you want in a startup. And I think that's what you want as a designer, because, having a stake and being a part of something is so exciting. So since the mid 2000s, I have been a part of, whether it's a partner or a co-founder of about 90 plus startups.
Wow.
And that's been an extraordinary adventure, because we've worked with small companies that have created things that have become the standard in the area. And we worked with, medium-sized startup that kind of blew up, for example, Uber, with whom we worked with for 4 years on the pickup experience. But then the others are, the Happiest Baby Snoo, which is a first in the world, the Jambox, which was the first, Bluetooth speaker, really to be commercialized, the first LED lights, the first crib for infants. All those projects are really come out of this notion of design venture and the ecosystem that design can bring to startups.
And that seems to make a ton of sense, because similar to software or content, a good design is replicable and scalable without much additional unit costs, right? So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense that you as a creator of these designs are also incentivized and compensated for the actual result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the work we do creates tremendous value for a startup that's competing against other startups, but also really large companies. And I believe that it's your unfair advantage. When you're in a startup, when you're doing a new venture, you want to have an unfair advantage over your competition. And a highly professional team that can create executions that people will love, that are efficient, that won't cost as much, etc., is an unfair advantage. And so I really believe, and others do, luckily for me, that design creates a lot of value, and that value, should be shared.
Absolutely. And how does the collaboration then across multiple different companies and even different projects and designs work? Because I can imagine with that setup, some companies might come back and say, hey, we need a change here, or we have a new product launching here. And suddenly almost everyone at the same time wants and needs your work. How do you balance that?
When you have a long-term relationship, that's what you favor. So, when we work with a startup that needs to iterate and refine, that's the natural way that a new venture has to operate, because you need to act very quickly. When you put a product in the market, it's not done. Actually, design is never done.
Exactly.
Believe it or not, I'm still working on the sail chair with the Herman Miller, 10, 12 years after it launched. There's still things that we can do to make it better. And so it's the same with startups, whether it's the next product or refinement of an existing one, or ways to improve the experience. Being on deck, as we call it, to support that team is really what being a partner is about.
Right.
And so, we'll favor, the things that we're excited about, whether it's the existing long-term relationships we have, or whether it's the, new hot idea that we feel we really want to be a part of.
Right. And how do you split your time across different projects at the same time? On one hand, you want to probably keep your creative energy and focus, but at the same time, you're also needed in multiple places?
So my role has almost always been, very early on at Fuse Project, I decided that the best place for me was to be a creative CEO, which means that I work on the projects, I work on the ideas, I move things forward with a team, I draw every day. And that also means that I have great partners who are more focused on the operations, are more focused on the finances and HR and whatnot. So what I believe my role is to understand, to have empathy for our clients, to work on the big ideas, to either support them when they're other people's big ideas, or to communicate them when they're mine, and mostly to move things forward. It's when you work for startups, you cannot be slow. We work with very large companies, and it takes them 2 months, 3 months to return a contract and to say, yes, let's go. With a startup, in 2 or 3 months, we could be done.
Of course.
And so I love speed. I love the immediacy and the high stakes of having to deliver something quickly and efficiently.
And I also wonder, when you then measure the success of a design, how do you do that? Of course, you have shares in the company. They can go up in valuation. You have potential sales revenue, but I guess there's more to that, how you measure success of a design.
Well, I measure success by, first, the big idea, being accepted in the world. Often when you have a new idea or a new type of product, if it fails, it actually, holds back the entire field by years and sometimes decades. Think about the electric car. The electric car was launched 4 or 5 times in the last 50 years. Every single time it was a failure because it was badly designed, because it was designed for the wrong audience, and because it had a bad experience until Tesla came about, and now many others. So having good design, good conception, good intent is really what makes these new ideas grow. So the first criteria is this idea and our design for it, our experience for it, whether it's digital or physical. Is this idea becoming convincing? Is it being adopted? And then the second one, when that happens, when this first step happens, the second one is the company can be successful, because without the first, without adoption and love for this new idea, your startup, is not going to succeed. And so, I measure success, basically in how those startups, those businesses are growing and how they're having an impact on their markets and beyond.
And how does it look for you on a personal level? You're involved in different projects. I assume your company also grew a bit since it started in 1999. How is everything for you compared to the early days? Is it the same fun, more fun, less fun?
I would say it's same and more. I'm, about 6 months ago, I purchased Fuse Project back. I sold it 9 years ago. I stayed CEO the entire time, and my work and my life didn't change that much. But I really felt that, now in my 50s, 2 things are possible. I can retire or semi-retire. And I looked around at all my friends who have been extremely successful and, very comfortable, who have a very comfortable life and who sold their businesses. The reality is that they're all miserable. So I knew I was always going to design for the rest of my existence. It became, more and more clear to me that having Fuse Project back maintaining this amazing team that's been with me for a long time, and recommitting again to the kind of innovative, partner-like, venture-like work that we do, was going to be central to the next 20 years plus of my work. So I actually feel now that the best is ahead of me. And so, we just became co-founders in a car company, Tello. I'm co-founding another company with the original August team, August Smart Lock, which was an incredible invention, and the company's doing very well. And I'm doubling down on this notion of design that accelerates new ideas.
So it really is, your passion that we can also see and hear in that interview that keeps you going, no matter, or not as important as the commercial, but really the passion that keeps you going, that fuels you to continue living these extremes of going all in and making the best designs happen.
Well, that's what Steve Jobs said, and I believe him, and I love that saying, which is, you're going to be doing extremely hard things. Mm-hmm. And if you don't love it, you're not going to have the strength to go through those hard things. And so having passion, loving what you do, remains what gives you the courage and the energy to sort of keep going. And so I think I have a lot of both, grit, courage, energy, persistence. Those are values that I like, and those are probably the values that keep driving me.
Exactly. And you already mentioned that you're a man of the extremes, and it's important to keep going and following your passion. At the same time, there's so much going on. So despite your passion for what you do, how do you also take care of yourself?
Well, as I say, I work all the time and I never work, which means that, I could be surfing, I could be snowboarding, I could be doing these things that I love, and my brain is still going. So I actually spend quite a bit of time learning new things in these sports. For example, surfing and big wave surfing have become a passion for me. And I feel like it's just as important to have that same mentality in my other practices, whether it's some sports, whether it's yoga, whether it's my family as well. Keeping a mentality of adventure and progress is what I try to do every day.
Amazing. And I also want to take us here to this very present moment. We are recording this episode in Lisbon in Portugal. You grew up in Switzerland. You basically built your career in San Francisco. What brought you to Lisbon? Why Portugal?
Well, I fell in love with Portugal, with Lisbon and its people actually during COVID. I was trying to get to Switzerland with my family to see my parents. It turned out the only place that didn't have a 2-week, quarantine at the time was Portugal. So I came here for 2 weeks before going to Switzerland, and I fell in love with it. And I started a studio here as well. So now we have a studio in Europe, in Portugal, and in San Francisco. And I'm working with a lot of European companies. This week at Milan Furniture Fair, we'll be launching some exciting new products and a transforming couch that I think is pretty interesting. We're working with cork here in Portugal. As you know, the cork trees are here, and we'll have a sort of a big sculpture / experience on the side of the river by the bridge in June. About half of our work has always been in Europe, and it made sense for us to have an anchor in Europe as well, as we're doing a lot of work in Paris and London and Italy, Portugal, and Switzerland as well.
Was it ever an option for you to go back to Switzerland?
Well, I'm in Switzerland a lot. I see my brothers and my parents in Lausanne. I still have my friends there, and I probably go 4 or 5 times a year. But I've become, an oceans person, and so I need the proximity of the ocean, whether it's in San Francisco or Portugal. I think having the release of nature around me is quite important.
Yeah, and the ocean is a difficult thing in Switzerland to find.
A funny anecdote which I bring up sometimes is during the punk years in Lausanne, one of the slogans was "Tear down the Alps so we can see the sea," and to this date, that is a spirit that I think I still believe in, which is, let's live and work in the places that are favorable, to change and ideas. And there's a lot more of that in Switzerland now as well. I have friends at the EPFL. I have friends in startups in Switzerland, and there is a bit of an ecosystem now in Switzerland to look past of its borders and into new ideas that can be universal.
Absolutely. And I know it's not fully fair to compare Switzerland with the United States just due to the sheer difference in size. But at the same time, I feel you have built an incredibly remarkable career. And in the US, you're a household name. People recognize you for your work. And I feel in Switzerland, we sometimes have a bit of a problem of doing so, of recognizing someone for the good work that they've done. Do you get your fair share of recognition in Switzerland?
I mean, I thought so. For many years, I didn't. I wasn't able to work in Switzerland for some reason because I didn't have clients there. And then a few years later, I started working with Omega. I started working with Rivella. We did a new Rivella bottle and brand, and that was super fun to revisit, such a classic, Swiss brand, and to work in the watch industry. So I'm hoping to do more of that. There's certainly nothing that holds me back personally from doing so. I do think that Switzerland benefits when it's open to outside ideas. Sometimes, I describe how big companies work, which they have a mentality of not invented here.
Exactly.
And I feel that Switzerland shouldn't have that, notion of not invented here. Of course, I'm Swiss, but I have other experiences in America and Asia and the rest of Europe. And I think, I think we would all benefit from working together. So I'm open.
Great to hear. And looking into the future, we heard you don't have any plans to retire or semi-retire soon. So what are your plans for the mid to long-term future?
So we're building a lot of new ventures, which I'm very excited about, as you heard. I really feel like the corporate world, all of the different areas of the market really need to have a strong change mindset towards sustainability and low carbon footprint. And I feel that without design, without that push, we won't get there. And so I have the ambition to work across multiple fields, whether it's health and healthcare and well-being, whether it's transportation, whether it's carbon capture, new sustainable materials. I have the ambition to be in the center of these discussions and to contribute as much as I can to this field. So, but I think it will require industry to believe that leadership is about change. And too often I find that especially large companies sort of fall back on the status quo. But I think even their leadership and their business will be very dependent on embracing the notion of change and evolving towards that.
Great. And to wrap up the conversation today, Yves, we also have some rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
I give you short questions or different options to choose from.
Okay.
Let's go. What is one design idea that you wish you had come up with yourself?
Well, maybe the snowboard.
That's a good one. What best defines you, designer or entrepreneur?
Both. I think at the core, I'm both. I can't separate one from the other.
What does money mean to you?
Money, as the hippies called it, is green energy.
Are you a user of your own design creations?
Yes, quite often.
Nice. And what do you hope your kids do better than you in their own lives?
Absolutely everything. I want my kids to be better than me at absolutely everything, whether it's life, sports, work, passion. My goal is for them to go way past where I am.
That's a high bar to pass.
Well, I'm also not putting any pressure on them. They probably won't listen to this interview.
Fair. And the last one for you today, San Francisco, Lisbon, or Lausanne?
For business, I would say San Francisco. Mm-hmm. For life, I would say Lisbon. And for, beauty of the horizon line of the lake, maybe Lausanne.
That's hard to beat. Fantastic. Yves, thank you so much for your insights and your valuable time. It was a pleasure talking to you and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.